Hi, y'all, and welcome back for another episode of Leadership that Liberates. Today, I want to talk about how we lead ourselves through life lessons. And this topic was really inspired by an oracle card that I pulled for my newsletter community last week. So, about a month ago, I started this kind of new practice with my newsletter because up until that point, it was very much just a space where I was sharing updates and not really offering any kind of insight or value. And I'd been thinking for some time, how do I want to do that? How do I want to bring more meaning and intention into that space in a way that feels light and easy? And what I landed on was that each week I will draw a card from a deck and I will share a message related to leadership and liberation that is connected to the card that I've pulled. And then I will offer some reflection questions for folks to do some deeper inner work around whatever the card is bringing up. And it was interesting because maybe the week leading up to when I actually drew the card, I kept seeing spirals everywhere in the context of personal growth, the image of spirals in nature. And when we're talking about spirals in the context of growth, they really refer to this process of revisiting lessons from the past in order to see them either from a higher perspective or from a deeper point of view, or they're serving some purpose to give us opportunity for deeper integration of the lesson. So there's the spiral, or we can find ourselves in loops of stuckness where we haven't actually understood the lesson and we're not really revisiting it from a place of expansion or deepening. Rather, we're circling around the lesson over and over and over again in this endless loop in a cycle because we're not actually getting what the lesson is. And oftentimes that is a result of the ways in which what needs to be seen and understood through the process of that experience is so deep within our unconscious that there's some kind of block or resistance to actually seeing what it is we need to see. And so I pulled this card that is round and round, and the image is a spiral. But I pulled the card in reverse. And so the message is different, right? Like when right side up, the message is about the spiral and the revisiting of lessons to deepen or expand one's learning or perspective or point of view. Whereas in reverse, it's round and round. We're going round in circles. We're not getting the lesson. So I'm just going to read first the message that came through for me to share with the collective in my newsletter. I'm also going to share the link in the show notes to the newsletter in case you're interested in following along with the card pools. But let me just pull that up. So I wrote, when right side up, this card references the spiral we move through in growth, the ways we come back around to past lessons, either to see things from a new perspective or for deeper integration. But in reverse, the message of this card is that we've been circling round and round a lesson. This isn't a spiral, it's a loop, a cycle, a situation or dynamic we find ourselves in again and again because we are the common denominator in the pattern. This card is asking us to get honest with ourselves about where we refuse to take any responsibility for the role we play in creating our lived experience. So, really, this is an invitation to shine a light on our shadows running the show. Where are you making an unconscious choice to remain in victimhood, bitterness, and resentment? Because taking accountability for your part in your own suffering is more uncomfortable than the discomfort of being in your own power. So that is the message that I shared. And today I wanted to expand on that because most of the time when people come to me to work with me, at least I know one-on-one capacity, they're doing so because they are stuck. They're stuck in a loop, in a cycle, in a pattern, and they don't know how to get out of it. And so what we're doing together is identifying the root cause of the loop or the cycle or the pattern? Why is it really happening? And that requires very, very, very deep shadow work. And part of the reason that, I think collectively, right, my whole argument is that we're never really getting to the root cause of issues. We're trying to address the symptoms. And so collectively, it's kind of this same dynamic. We're not going deep enough to actually identify what is driving this problem or issue or challenge. And so we're kind of working with the symptoms of how it's showing up, but then we're in this loop, right? We come back around the challenge, the problem, the issue. It resurfaces because we're not actually going deep enough into the root cause of what's driving it. And this brings up all kinds of things around the unconscious and the nervous system. And there are different aspects of what I want to share today that I have alluded to and touched on in different episodes as well. So this isn't going to be like completely new, but when we're in these loops, there is something that we don't want to see. That's why we keep entering into the pattern, because actually to face the deeper thing that's going on would be so uncomfortable, would be so painful, would bring up so much grief. There'd be a lot of loss. And one of the things that we would lose are the ways in which we are actually gaining something from the patterns that are creating problems for us. There is something that we are receiving from those dynamics, whether it be attention, whether it be somebody else's guilt and the way that that shows up and how they try to show up for us because of the guilt that they're experiencing, or maybe we're going to lose some type of connection that we think is important, or maybe we're going to lose some sense of security or safety from the familiarity of this pattern, of this loop. There is something within us that knows that we will lose something if we stop the pattern, even if it's something that we're constantly complaining about. And not only losing something that we're either receiving from other people, but also this loss of self that would happen if we have to actually address the root cause of the problem. It's loss of identity. It's loss of some aspect of who we've believed ourselves to be, some story we've told ourselves. And in this case, usually it's a story that is overshadowing some of the more negative aspects of play that we don't really want to see. I always come back in my work to what James Baldwin said, and I don't know if I've probably repeated this quote like 50,000 times in the context of the podcast. I don't really remember, but it is something I say so much, where he says that one of the reasons we cling to hate so stubbornly is because we sense that without that hate, we are going to be forced to deal with pain. He's talking in the sense of collective oppression and like more kind of social cultural dynamics, but it also really applies to this context. I think we cling so stubbornly to what is known or familiar because we sense that without that, we would have to deal with pain. And the reason we continue to enter into these cycles and loops without resolution is because there is an avoidance of the pain that would arise if we were to actually look at the deeper root cause, if we were to look at the part of ourselves that is co-creating that dynamic with someone else, or that is reliving some kind of certain situation or circumstance over and over and over again. I've said this before, but when we're in a pattern, the common denominator in the pattern is us. There is some role that we are playing. And by not being in our own power, kind of referring to that question that I asked at the end of the written message in the newsletter, if it's too uncomfortable to be in our own power, then we're going to look for ways to absolve ourselves of any accountability or responsibility, which is where we tend to blame other people and be like, why is this happening to me, right? We get really into that kind of the victim mindset where we feel like we're a victim to the circumstances of our life, and we feel like other people are responsible for what we're experiencing and that they're to blame because there is something within us that we're afraid to look at. In order to understand what our role is in the pattern, there are some ways that we can start to examine the patterns that we find ourselves in. I think an example that a lot of people will understand is when we talk about kind of relationship dynamics and how the person with the anxious attachment is always drawn to the person with the avoidant attachment. The avoidant person cannot actually give the anxious person what they need and want in relationship. And the avoidant person is trying to avoid and escape in ways, while the anxious attached person is like, let me try to win you over, or let me try to convince you that I'm worthy. One thing that can help us, especially because it is really confronting to look at our own role in the patterns, is to first identify what are the commonalities to what's happening outside of me. Let's say in this case, I am feeling very drawn to avoidant partners, but I am myself anxious. So, what are the commonalities? These avoidant partners, well, they're avoidant. They're not offering reassurance. They run away when things get intimate or vulnerable. What are the patterns in the pattern? And then, what might that be reflecting about me? What might that be showing me about what I am needing or what I am really wanting? So, in the case of the avoidant and the anxiously attached person, well, probably the anxiously attached person is wanting or needing some sense of security or stability, which is playing a role in why they're actually going after people who can never give them that. Or the avoidant person is not communicating their feelings. And so, as an anxiously attached person, I'm feeling like I'm in the dark. I'm feeling like I don't know what's going on. That is creating stories for me around abandonment, around rejection, whatever it might be. And so, we start to identify what are the parts of me that are asking to be seen in this challenge, in this loop, in this pattern, in this dynamic. What are the parts of me that want to be seen? And then how far back do I remember feeling these things? What is this related to? And in the case, at least, of the attachment, it's probably about childhood. It's probably about some dynamic that we internalized. And so there is some sort of aspect of familiarity that comes with the dynamic of the anxiously attached person seeking the attention and validation and affirmations of the avoidant person, which probably signals that this person had a caretaker in their childhood who was not showing up in an emotionally attuned capacity. So, this person who is anxiously attached was likely experiencing as a child emotional neglect, some sort of emotional invalidation, and became familiar with this dynamic and is then unconsciously, this is unconscious, they're unconsciously seeking people who validate that dynamic, who allow them to continue to play the role that they've always played. One, because it is familiar. And familiarity, as we've said so many times before in past episodes, leads to this false sense of safety because there's a comfort with what is known to us, even if it's destructive, even if it creates suffering for us. The suffering that we know is more comfortable to us than the suffering that we don't know. We would rather just be in familiar pain than open ourselves up to the uncertainty of what we haven't yet experienced. It feels familiar. There's a illusion of safety here. And there is that unconscious desire to experience resolution. And I talked a lot about this in the episode around vengeance and victimhood, I think it was, where we talk about how there's a deeper desire for justice that is really driving a lot of our unconscious dynamics because we are wanting the person that we're now engaging with to show up differently than the original person did. So we keep recreating the same scenario over and over again because we're hoping and looking for a different outcome. And so this is very interesting because like I've seen this with a lot of people that I've worked with. This happens with a lot of my friends. It was definitely like a huge part of my own experience when I was younger. The kind of anxiously attached person has a tendency toward fantasy. They have a tendency toward what one of my friends calls limerence. I mean, which is like a real thing, but it's like I've never actually heard it called limerence before. She called it that. But it's like where we kind of get wrapped up in the fantasy. What would it be like if this person chose me? What would it be like if they actually gave me the attention that I'm wanting? Would it be like if they actually showed up for me in the ways that I'm craving and desiring? Usually, what we're actually wanting is a parent to do that for us. There's a younger part of ourselves that is trying to have the needs of our younger selves met through the people that we're entering into these dynamics with. I've talked about this before, but nothing outside of us will actually change unless we're the ones that change, unless we're the ones that take a new approach, unless we're the ones that do something differently, that change our behavior, that stop waiting for something outside of us to transform this dynamic. Because the point is that we continue to enter the dynamic because the thing that remains untransformed is within us, not outside of us. Nothing goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. And so, what do I need to know? What is this younger part of myself looking for? What am I gaining? What am I gaining by being stuck in this pattern, by being in this loop? And again, that this is going to lead to some level of grief. Because if we're really going to face those parts of ourselves, it means that we're going to have to let go of some identity that we've had, whether it be the identity of the victim, whether it be the identity of the scorned person. Maybe we have this identity that we're a very caring, compassionate friend, but maybe we're not always showing up in congruence with the ways that we see ourselves. And so then we're receiving kind of this feedback from the outside world that maybe the story we're telling ourselves about ourselves isn't necessarily true. And so then we would have to reconcile with that, right? Which is like something that I have had to experience many times in my life. It's also the good things that I'm telling myself about myself that are not necessarily aligned. The way that I'm showing up in the world doesn't necessarily align with my story. And this is how we can see this playing out too, socially and collectively and culturally, alluding back to last week's episode around online shaming and cancel culture. The story of the people who are engaging in that behavior is that they're very progressive, that they're very compassionate people, that they care a lot about humanity, which is why it's hard for many people engaging in those dynamics to see that behavior is so counter to what they say they stand for and the values that they claim to live by, because it doesn't fit with the narrative of being an activist or a change maker or whatever. To engage in these very dehumanizing tactics, it's not congruent with their self-concept. So it doesn't for them feel like, oh, I'm doing something bad or wrong because I can't allow myself to think that this could be bad or wrong, because then it would challenge this story that I've been telling myself about myself. And also, when I talked about international development and neo-colonialism and the ways in which we're really perpetuating these harmful power dynamics through this language of developed and undeveloped and who is on which side of that and how we're going about all of that. It's like that is also this loop, right? We're in a loop. We're not recognizing that kind of juxtaposition between the savior and the martyr and the people that need to be helped and saved. The ways in which that is perpetuating the colonial rhetoric and discourse around who's more advanced or more civilized than who else, and the ways that that plays into these loops. So I'm going to go save the world. And it's like through that process of trying to save other people, we're actually perpetuating harm and extracting and exploiting and creating the conditions for those people to continue to need help. And so we're in this loop. Because in that situation, it would be too confronting for the person who wants to save the world to look at themselves and see that actually that desire is so damaging and harmful. Because again, it goes against the identity that person has around being good and wanting to do good in the world. So there is some aspect of identity that we are trying to protect and preserve. And again, this is why the shadow exists. It is to protect us. It is to put self-protective mechanisms in place. And there are a lot of different ways that we try to protect ourselves. We want to protect ourselves from the qualities that we don't want to attribute to ourselves. We want to protect ourselves from rejection. We want to protect ourselves from criticism. And in so many cases, we're unconsciously trying to protect ourselves from getting what it is we really desire. We're trying to unconsciously protect ourselves from being happy. It's so wild. The more that I do this work and I see the ways that our self-protective mechanisms play out, it's honestly wild. It's honestly wild the lengths that we will go to without being aware that we're doing it to keep ourselves unhappy because happiness is threatening for so many of us who have never really experienced ease and joy and pleasure and play. We had to grow up too fast, or we experienced so much violence and abuse, or we had these really sort of tumultuous, painful experiences. It's like we don't actually know how to experience the good. And we will protect ourselves from having a blissful life because the joy and the happiness and the pleasure and the play is unknown. It is unfamiliar. And the unknown and the unfamiliar for us has an unconscious association with lack of safety. Something in us believes that we will not be safe if we actually have what we want. And so we keep ourselves in loops and patterns that perpetuate everything that we don't want because it's everything that we know. And again, I've talked about this before that the nervous system is definitely playing a role in this because we become addicted to the what's the word? The biological, physiological responses that we're having to certain dynamics. If my nervous system has been patterned as a child to operate in a certain way because it has to in the context of my environment, then that is how my body is automatically orienting and responding to the world around me. So I am going to unconsciously put myself in dynamics and situations that allow my nervous system to function as it knows how to function. If I only know this anxiety and this anxiousness in connection and relationship, then I'm going to seek that out. And again, it's not consciously that we're doing this. Our body's like running on autopilot. So are our unconscious minds, which I really want to bring in this woman, Shannon Eastman, to talk about the relationship between the unconscious and the nervous system, which I mentioned some episodes ago, because she does all this work on how she believes they're the same thing. That would be very interesting. We're really keeping ourselves in these loops because in some way it is serving us. And because if we were to try to break the pattern, we would have to be confronted with pain. We would have to experience loss and grief. It would be a very painful experience to look at the root of the pattern and see where within us there is some responsibility for the pattern. But the thing is like it would be short-term pain. You know what I'm saying? It's like we would move beyond it. And then on the other side of it would be the freedom, would be the joy, would be more ease. But we're so conditioned to seek out short-term satisfaction that the thought of experiencing hardship temporarily in order to have the good thing on the other side of it. It's not appealing to us. We either want the good thing, like immediately and without effort, or we're not going to go through the hard part to get there. But we're already experiencing the hard, right? It's like we're already in the hard. It's just that it's the hard that is known to us. And so, how do we lead ourselves through this, right? How do we lead ourselves through these life lessons? It really is about taking accountability for our own lived experience and the responsibility for our own lived experience. And that doesn't mean that there are not factors and conditions and circumstances outside of us that are impacting us that we don't actually have control over. It is true that we live within a set of systems that are oppressive. It is true that some people have more access to resources than others. It is true that some people experience relatively more safety in life than others. These things are true. And when it comes to our own personal lives and certain choices that we make, there are absolutely situations in which we feel we have no control, but actually we are the only ones with the agency and autonomy to change the situation or the circumstance. But because we have abdicated our own personal power, we don't believe that's possible for us. And so we spiral into hopelessness and helplessness. This isn't about blaming ourselves. This isn't about shaming ourselves. This isn't about feeling guilty. When we see the role we're playing in the patterns, when we come to understand what it is that this deeper part of us is desiring through the experience of the pattern, then we have the choice, the responsibility, the ability to choose how we respond to the situation. And that means we have to take accountability for our lived experience, which means that we orient to our lives as adults rather than children. Because the avoidance of accountability and responsibility is the younger part of ourselves who actually wasn't responsible for the things that we experienced. And so, because that younger inner wounded part of us is leading the charge, we're avoiding responsibility because that part of us was never meant to be held responsible. That part of us was showing up to the environment in whatever way was needed to ensure safety, to ensure acceptance, to ensure having survival needs met. But it was the responsibility of the adults in our lives not to put us in a position to have to suppress parts of ourselves in order to have those needs met. But because those people didn't show up in ways that were responsible, because they didn't take accountability for their own impact, and in many ways, it's because they probably also weren't aware, right? This is also why we have loops generationally, intergenerationally, why we experience these cycles within our lineage is because this inability to see the deeper thing at play because of how confronting it is. It's just carried on generation to generation. And so this younger part of ourselves wasn't actually meant to be responsible for this. So there is some part of us that is denying taking any kind of responsibility because we shouldn't have had to. But the thing is now, we are engaging in these dynamics as adults, no longer as children, no longer actually depending on this other person to ensure that we survive. And obviously, there are cases where it actually is true that that's happening. Let's say, like, somebody's in an abusive dynamic that they feel trapped in and they have to show up in a particular way to ensure their safety. That's different, right? So just be discerning about what I'm talking about and how it applies to you and your own lived experience. And again, it's not about blaming ourselves. It's not about like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot that like I could never see this thing, or I'm such a bad person because I didn't know that I was having this impact on other people. It isn't about shaming or blaming ourselves. Taking accountability just means like, oh yeah, I am playing some part in this. And that's so empowering because it means that I have the ability to respond in a new and different way. I would like to leave you with some reflection questions that I posed in the newsletter that were related to this card that I had drawn round and round, the spiral circle. Like I said, I'll drop the link to subscribe to the newsletter in case you want to like keep up with these in the future. But the questions that I included in that email that I will share with you as an invitation for reflection. There's 4 questions. So, one, what am I actually gaining by staying stuck in this loop? Some examples might be comfort, familiarity, control, sympathy. So, what am I actually gaining by staying stuck in this loop? The next question, what parts of myself do I resist seeing because they threaten the way I want to see myself? If I chose to step out of this loop, what truth about myself would I have to face? And the final question, where am I more invested in being right than being free? So, just an invitation, if you feel called to reflect on that, if you want to identify some kind of pattern that you've noticed playing out in your life, that you feel like you're kind of circling round and round, right? It's just a loop, it's a cycle, it's like you don't know how to break free of it. Use what I've shared with you in this episode to reflect on the dynamics at play within that pattern, and then ask yourself these questions. And of course, reach out if you want support doing this, because it's what I excel at. It is my genius to help people uncover what's at the root of their loopy cycles. And so that's all for today, and I'll see you all next time.